On the 2nd of May 2021, something happened that had never happened before in the 30-year history of the Premier League. A football match was postponed because fans stormed the stadium. Hundreds of Manchester United supporters broke into Old Trafford, made their way onto the pitch, and refused to leave. Others gathered outside the Lowry Hotel, where the players were staying ahead of the game against Liverpool. The fixture was eventually called off. Flares were lit, banners read "Glazers out." Gary Neville, Roy Keane, and Jamie Carragher, not exactly natural allies, all expressed sympathy with the protesters on television that night. To understand why that happened, you have to go back 16 years, to a leveraged buyout, a pile of debt, and the question of what a football club actually is, and who it belongs to. Manchester United entered the 21st century as arguably the most successful football institution on the planet. Under Sir Alex Ferguson, they had won the Premier League 8 times in 10 years. They'd won the Champions League in 1999 in one of the most dramatic finals in the history of the sport. Financially, the club was publicly listed on the London Stock Exchange. It had been since 1991, but it operated conservatively. It was essentially debt-free. Profits were reinvested. Old Trafford had been expanded from roughly 40,000 seats to 75,000. The club was generating revenues that dwarfed most of its rivals. Then an American businessman named Malcolm Glazer started buying shares. Glazer was the owner of the NFL's Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a franchise he had purchased in 1995 and turned into Super Bowl champions. He began accumulating Manchester United shares quietly in 2003, starting with a 2.9% stake, and kept buying. By early 2005, he had 57% of the club. In May of that year, after securing the large stake held by Irish racing tycoons JP McManus and John Magnier, he crossed the threshold required under UK company law to compulsorily acquire the remaining shares and take the club private. The total price was approximately £790 million. Malcolm Glazer did not have £790 million sitting around. He borrowed most of it. And crucially, in what fans still regard as the original sin of this whole story, he secured those loans against the assets of Manchester United itself. The club, which had been debt-free, suddenly owed hundreds of millions of pounds. It had been bought with its own money. That same year, the Green and Gold campaign emerged. Fans wearing scarves in the original colours of Newton Heath, the club that eventually became Manchester United, as a visible protest symbol. Even David Beckham put one on during his return to Old Trafford with AC Milan. The Glazers never engaged publicly with any of it. Joel Glazer had promised in 2005 that the family would reach out to supporters day in, day out. They largely didn't. In the years that followed, they were rarely seen at games. They managed the club from America. The protests simmered, quieted as the team kept winning, and simmered again, but they never fully disappeared. In 2012, the Glazers decided to take Manchester United public again, but not on the London Stock Exchange where it had previously traded, and not in England. They listed the club on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker MANU. The choice of New York was deliberate. American exchanges allow dual-class share structures that London's main market does not, and the Glazers were determined to keep total control. Here is how they designed it. Class A shares were sold to the public. Each Class A share carried one vote. Class B shares were retained by the Glazer family. Each Class B share carried 10 votes. The result was that even after selling shares to the public, the Glazers retained more than 98% of the voting power over the club. There would be no dividends for Class A shareholders. The Glazers had paid themselves dividends before the IPO, roughly £10 million earlier in 2012, but ordinary investors in the public offering would receive nothing of the sort. The market noticed. The original price range for the IPO was $16 to $20 per share. After negative feedback from Wall Street analysts, the price was cut to $14. The offering raised $233 million. About half went to paying down debt. The other half, roughly $110 million, went directly into the Glazer family's pockets. One of the largest investors in the IPO was George Soros, whose fund bought around $40 million worth of Class A shares. He presumably understood what he was getting into. Many retail investors may not have. The stock debuted on August 10, 2012 at $14, edged up to $14.05, and then closed back at the offer price. It was not an auspicious beginning. A football club occupies a unique category. It is, legally and structurally, a business. It has revenues, costs, employees, shareholders, and a responsibility to manage its finances. But it is also something else. It is a community institution, often over a century old, woven into the identity of a city and a fan base that has no real alternative. If you are a Manchester United supporter, you cannot switch allegiance to a different club the way you might switch banks or choose a different phone brand. Your attachment is tribal, emotional, often inherited from your parents. The club has meaning that extends far beyond its utility as entertainment. Shareholders of a listed company typically want return on their investment. They want the stock price to go up or they want dividends. That's what shares are. But Manchester United supporters don't primarily want dividends. They want the club to win trophies, to invest in the squad and the ground, to represent the city well. Those goals can coexist, but they require careful alignment. When ownership prioritizes extraction over investment, the two diverge. What the Glazers found was that you could run Manchester United as a brand licensing and sponsorship business, while the footballing side declined, and the commercial revenues would hold up for a surprisingly long time. Global fan base inertia is powerful. Sponsors care about reach, not league position, at least in the short term. The brand's heritage carried it through a decade and more of competitive underperformance. But the cost, in terms of supporter trust, was enormous. By 2021, the Glazers were so estranged from the fan base that when they supported the European Super League project, a closed competition that would have guaranteed revenues to elite clubs regardless of sporting merit, the reaction was explosive. Fans didn't just dislike the Super League on sporting grounds, they saw it as the logical endpoint of treating a football club as a financial asset. Remove the competitive jeopardy entirely and guarantee the cash flows. The project collapsed within 48 hours under a wave of fan, media, government, and player opposition. Manchester United withdrew. Joel Glazer apologized. It was by that point too little. In November 2022, the Glazers announced they were exploring strategic alternatives, including a possible sale. The announcement sent MA News stock up 25% in a single day. Two serious bidders emerged: Sir Jim Ratcliffe, a British billionaire and lifelong United supporter who had built his fortune through the chemical company Ineos, and Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani of Qatar, who wanted to buy the club outright. After more than a year of negotiations, the Glazers chose neither full sale option. Sheikh Jassim withdrew his bid in October 2023. Ratcliffe completed a purchase of approximately 25% of the club, specifically control of football operations, for around £1.25 billion, valuing the club at roughly £5 billion excluding debt. The Glazers retain majority ownership and the Class B voting shares. Ratcliffe's Ineos took over day-to-day football operations from early 2024. New management was brought in, more than 450 staff were made redundant. Ticket prices were raised to £66 for general admission, a move that provoked significant anger and a major protest in March 2025. The club was still carrying over £1 billion in total debt. On the pitch, the 2024-25 season was historically poor, 15th in the Premier League, an all-time low. But the Europa League final was reached, suggesting some footballing identity was returning under manager Ruben Amorim, who replaced Erik ten Hag mid-season. The season ended in defeat in the final, but there was at least a sign of direction. The debt situation remained the most pressing constraint. At its peak, the total amount extracted from the club by the Glazers through debt service, interest, dividends, and share sales over their ownership was estimated to have exceeded £1.5 billion. Money that, had it been reinvested, might have funded stadium renovations, transfer spending, or infrastructure. Old Trafford, once the largest club stadium in the UK, was by 2024 not only visibly aging but had been excluded from the list of venues for Euro 2028, which will be hosted by the UK and Ireland. A stadium that hosted Champions League finals had become unfit for a continental tournament. That is a physical monument to 2 decades of underinvestment. Manchester United's story is an extreme case, but the underlying dynamic is not unique. It plays out in different forms across professional football and across the sports industry more broadly. When private equity firms buy sports franchises, they generally want returns within a defined time horizon. When foreign state funds buy football clubs, as has happened at Manchester City, Paris Saint-Germain, and Newcastle United, they are often seeking reputational capital, diplomatic soft power, or simply national prestige rather than financial return. These owners are willing to run clubs at a loss because the non-financial rewards justify the expense. That creates a two-tier system. Clubs owned by actors who don't need to make money can outspend clubs owned by actors who do. Manchester United, which was profitable under the Glazers in the sense that revenues exceeded operating costs, was simultaneously being outcompeted by rivals who didn't care about profitability and were simply outspending them for talent. Winning the Premier League doesn't guarantee profits, but not winning it definitely affects broadcasting revenues, sponsorship premiums, and player recruitment. The question of fan ownership has surfaced repeatedly as a response to these pressures. German football operates under the 50+1 rule, which requires that members, effectively supporters, hold voting control over all clubs in the top two divisions. German clubs therefore cannot be acquired through leveraged buyouts or taken over by foreign states. They cannot be used as financial vehicles. The trade-off is that they cannot access the enormous capital that wealthy private owners bring to English clubs. Bayern Munich is one of the most successful clubs in the world with a member-owned structure. But German football's governance model has produced a more cautious and arguably more sustainable financial culture. The English Premier League has resisted this model. The argument from league officials has typically been that open private ownership has attracted the investment that made it the wealthiest and most watched football league in the world. That is empirically true. Whether it has made it the best governed or the one most aligned with the interests of the communities whose clubs it represents is a different question. Manchester United is currently worth somewhere in the region of $5 to $6 billion. The Glazers paid £790 million for it in 2005. By that measure, the investment has been a financial success. The club's fan base hasn't shrunk. Its shirt deal is one of the largest in the sport. Its commercial revenue is at record levels. The brand, in purely mercantile terms, is more valuable than it has ever been. And yet, Old Trafford is crumbling. The Premier League title has not been won since 2013. The club is carrying £1 billion in debt that wouldn't exist had it not been used as collateral for an acquisition. Fans stormed the pitch. The Europa League final was lost. A proud institution is being slowly rebuilt from a weakened position. The Class A shares, bought at $14 in 2012, traded at $13 in early 2025. 13 years, a negative return. What Manchester United teaches us is not simply that greed is bad in football, though that is not wrong. It teaches us something more structural, that a football club listed on a stock exchange faces a near impossible task of simultaneously satisfying investors who want returns, fans who want trophies, players who want wages, and a city that wants representation. When those interests conflict, and they will conflict, someone loses. At Old Trafford for about 20 years, it was the fans.